Welcome, everybody. This is the second class in the series. I think it's called Towards a Better Future, or Vision for a Better Future. Maybe if someone remembers the exact title, you can let me know. But it's about how to create a better future for all of us through the wisdom of the Torah. And this particular class is called How to Solve Problems in the World Today. Now, I was thinking of giving this class a different title. And I was thinking of calling it How to Solve One Problem Without Creating Another Problem. Or something of that nature. But basically, I'm actually very excited about this class because this is based on a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that I had the privilege to study in yeshiva, and it's very, very interesting. And there's so much to it. There's so much in it. It could probably be studied, and books and studies could be made out of just this one talk. And we'll cover, the gist. We'll cover the structure of it basically, but there's a lot much more still to unpack. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to share with you this little PowerPoint we have here. Share screen. And let's see here. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So, vision for a better future, how to approach problems in the world today. Let's get started. So, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is good and evil. So basically, if we want to go from world being in a less good state towards world being in the best possible state, what's the framework in which we're operating? How do we understand what good is? How do we understand what not good is in order that we could best try to make the world a better place? So, of course, everything starts with Torah, and the Torah actually tells us when good and evil first became integrated and mixed into the world. And in this week's Torah portion, the very first Torah portion of the Torah, we're coming from the month of Tishrei, the month of the holidays. We just finished Simchas Torah, the celebration of the ending of the Torah, and this week we're starting the first portion of Bereshit, in the beginning, Genesis. So let's read here a little piece from this week's Torah portion about the tree of knowledge, good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's a very cryptic, mystical story in the Torah about the very first sin that ever happened. Adam and Chava ate from this tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. So let's look inside. Let's click on this link here. Command not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And there we have it. And we'll start with verse 9. So we're talking here about the Garden of Eden. And I'll read verse 9. And the Lord God caused to sprout from the ground every tree pleasant to see and good to eat, and the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's two unique trees that are here in the garden. Now let's move on to verses 16 and 17. The very first commands of Hashem, verse 16. And the Lord God commanded man, saying, quote, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it. For on the day that you eat thereof you shall surely die. So let's just note here, God did not say the reason why he should not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but kind of let him know the punishment or the consequence that he would die if he ate from this tree. So let's move on to the next chapter here of
I have a
go
question.
back to the power.
Real
Yes,
quick.
go ahead.
on the tree of not, looking at, you shall not eat from that tree. By this time, Eve is, Adam's woman there. She is already around. This is what yeah. Okay. I think I answered it myself. I think I answered.
Okay.
He wasn't just commanding Adam, right? He was also commanding her, the wife, the woman.
Yeah, both. Actually, no. Look at the next verse. The verse 18, which is the verse right after. This from the simple reading of the Torah, verses 16 and 17, it was only Adam that was alive at the time. And then if you look at the next verse, which is 18, you see that that's where the story of woman being created starts. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man is alone. I shall make a helpmate.
All right, so he was told ahead of time. Okay, got it.
Yeah, although I don't know for sure, because there may be other commentators that say that some of it may have been written out of order. But either way, it was definitely intended for both of them, the command. That's for sure. So let's read on back to the PowerPoint. Let's go to...
Sorry, I'm late.
Hello. All right, very good. Who else is there? Okay, Lippy's excellent. So let's go to 1 to 7 and 22, okay? So can everyone see this from Chabad.org now? The serpent was cunning?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we're going to read verses 1 through 7. Let's have somebody read this. Maybe Reb Shmuel, can you read for us some of these verses? Let's say verse number 1, 2, or 3. Just a story of when the people first violated Hashem's command.
Now the serpent was cunning beyond any beast of the field that Hashem God had made. He said to the woman, did perhaps God say, you shall not eat of any tree of the garden?
Okay, and let's skip the gray boxes because that's Rashi. We'll go to
actually, I was reading from I was reading from the Chumash. So
that's good too. That's great. Perfect.
It's not on the screen.
It's not on the screen?
Yeah.
No, on the screen says Vision for a Better Future.
Okay, so that's okay. I'm gonna have to Okay, good. So let me share the screen here.
From the Chumash.
Okay, you see it now?
There we go. We see it now.
Good. Okay, continue on verse 2.
And the woman said to the serpent, of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of the trees that is in the midst of the garden, God said, you shall not eat it, you shall not touch it, lest you die.
I just want to add a parenthetical note here. If you look in this gray box of Rashi, it says something very interesting. It's very important, just as it's important not to do less than what you're told, it's also important not to add on more. And Chava, when she repeated over Hashem's command, she says, God said not to eat it and not to touch it. She added on something extra, which that resulted in a problem. Why did that result in a problem? Because then the snake pushed her until she touched it, and she saw that nothing happened. And she thought that the command didn't have any real consequence. So basically, sometimes when there's an important thing for someone to do, we need to be careful not to add too many things over it, because then they won't take it seriously.
Yeah.
The core thing that they're told to be careful with. Okay, let's go on to verse 4, 5, 6, and 7. Maybe Steve, if you'd like to read some verses here.
And the serpent said to the woman, you shall surely not die. For God knows that on that day you eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like angels, knowing good and evil. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delight to the eyes, and the tree was desirable to make one wise. So she took its fruit, and she ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate.
And let's do 7 as well.
And the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves and made themselves girdles.
Okay. Okay, all right. So let's go back to 6. Or let's go back to 5, actually. So the snake, until now, all we know is that if man eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that's what it was called, Eitz Hada'as Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So until now, all we knew was that if man eats it, he will die. That's what God said. The snake is teaching us something new that he's claiming about this tree. He's suggesting that if man or woman eats from this tree, they will gain knowledge of good and evil, just like God has. And that's why God doesn't want you to eat it. So was the snake saying something conspiring? Actually happens to be that the snake was actually correct. The snake was right. Once they ate from that tree, they all of a sudden, until then, they did not know evil. And once they ate from the tree, they knew good and evil. Where do we see this? So we see this in verse 7. It says, and the eyes of both of them were opened. And here's the main part, and they knew that they were naked. So until then, they had no clothing, but it didn't matter to them that they had no clothing. They didn't know of the concept of modesty because they didn't know of the concept of evil. There was no reason for them to even imagine that they should be modest. They didn't know that being immodest could lead to anything. Let's read Rashi over here in the middle. Rashi asks, and they did not, and they knew that they were naked. So Rashi asks, even a blind man knows when he is naked. What then is the meaning of, and they knew that they were naked? So they had one commandment in their possession, they became denuded of it. Actually, I want to go back to another verse at the end of chapter 2, before they ate from the tree of knowledge. We missed this verse. Verse 25, maybe Vivian, if you could read this one. I'm going back for a moment, the end of chapter 2, before they ate from the tree. What did they know about nakedness? Go ahead, verse 25.
They were both naked, the man and his wife, but they were not ashamed.
Oh, so let's read Rashi here. Vivian, if you could help read for us the Rashi there.
Okay, but they were not ashamed. So what he's saying is, for they did not know the way of modesty to distinguish between good and evil. And even though knowledge was granted him to call all the creatures' names, he was not imbued with the evil inclination until he ate of the tree. And the evil inclination entered into him, and then he knew the difference between good and evil.
Okay, so here's the contrast. Verse 25, they were naked, but they were not ashamed. That's before they ate from the tree. Chapter 2, verse 25. And then when we go ahead to chapter 3, verse 7, after they ate from the tree, and the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And that's why they sewed fig leaves and made themselves girdles. They made for themselves the first clothing in human history.
Rabbi.
After eating from the tree. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Rabbi, so what? So they were both married. They were both had a contract, a wedding contract, and they were going to have a family and da-da-da-da. And they were adults, and so what? That they were naked together.
Right. So excellent question. The function is very simple. Why do we wear clothing today? Right. So the reason why we wear clothing today is because we have a recognition and an awareness of evil. What do I mean by that? We're aware of the evil that exists not in us, but in everyone else, in the case of modesty. Meaning to say, if everybody would be naked, there would be a fear that someone else would be tempted to do something improper and violate their contract. So Adam and Chava made a marital contract. They can be with each other. But if they're naked and then someone else sees them, that person, if they don't even know about evil, they're not even aware of this concept. Once they know about evil, then they're now aware that anyone else who sees them might be tempted to make one of them violate their contract. So when they were not aware of evil, they were immodest. And where do we see this, by the way? This actually happened. We see this by the snake. So if I'll go back to Rashi.
Rabbi, I want to interject something, and I'm trying to wait to see where would be a good time to interject, my opinion.
Okay, here.
Or my question.
So one moment, Charlie. We'll just read one Rashi first, and then
Okay, go ahead,
we'll
go
get
ahead,
to
go
that
ahead, go ahead.
interjection. We're going to do this Rashi. Now, the serpent was cunning. So let's just read this part. But it teaches you. But it teaches you as a result of what plan the serpent thrust himself upon them. Why did the serpent come to Adam and Chava to try to convince them to eat from the tree? So he saw them naked and engaging in intercourse before everyone's eyes, and he desired her. This is from Genesis Rabbah 18:6 and the Medrash Rabbah 18:6. So basically, according to the Medrash, because they didn't know about the concept of evil, so they didn't even consider that someone else might have an improper temptation to make one of them violate their marital contract. They didn't even consider that. That's why they were naked and engaging in relations before the eyes of all. That's what Rashi says. And that's when the serpent, the snake, saw them, and he wanted, actually says, I don't see it in this Rashi, but it says he wanted Adam to do the sin so that he could marry Chava. That's what it says elsewhere. And then that was before they ate from the tree. Once they ate from the tree, they became aware of good and evil. They realized that there's this concept of temptation, and they made sure to clothe themselves so that no one else would be tempted by observing them. Does that make sense?
Well, they weren't even aware of someone else at that point. I mean, they're fresh. So they're already learning about something after they take it from the tree. They're already learning that there's someone else out there that they should be modest about. And even though they haven't met that person yet. So it's a bigger question than just themselves. They're already thinking about the world. And that's what Hava's thinking about. She's thinking about what are we going to do outside of Gan Eden before they're even outside of Gan Eden. So they're moving on. This is a fast-paced dialogue.
I don't know, but in an innocent kind of way, when you have a husband and a wife that come together that love each other, they think that that their marriage is like forever enduring, and they don't even consider until confronted with the possibility that somebody would approach the spouse and want them for themselves. Like, I don't know how it works with Chabad, but like with most when you see like people that are new in their marriage and they're in that honeymoon stage, it's like nothing could interfere with that relationship. And then all of a sudden, someone comes and tries to interfere. Like, a guy will say something to the wife, or a woman will say something to the husband, and then, you take that stance of like, oh, I had no idea that anybody would ever try to interfere in a marriage. Like it's that kind of like same innocence. And that was not my question. My question was completely different.
Okay,
I just wanted to put that out there, because we think about how things are innocent, like with children that don't put on clothing, or they'll just, they'll have clothes on, they
Very
don't get
good.
it, and they start taking all that clothes off, and it's like,
Yep.
what do you mean I have to put clothes on? That doesn't make sense to me until you explain to them that, because others might want, to see you and exposed, you need to be covered. So in
Right.
both those, I think both those are great analogies. My question was more in the sense of back to when I first came in, right? And you were saying about how it was two things. It was like, the serpent said, if you touch the fruit, and then if you eat it, and then touching it and eating, you will die. But then my question is, so early on, before, Hava had any idea what death was. Like, how could you conceptualize? You talk about if you touch it, you're okay, nothing happened. But then how could they have possibly conceptualized also what death was? Because no person had died as of yet.
The serpent says, surely you will not die. Okay?
Right. He says, sure. Right.
But
Well, they were
Hashem
told by
said
Hashem,
that they
if they
would
eat
die.
from the tree, they will surely die. And the snake told them, don't worry, if you eat from it, you won't die.
You won't die,
That's
right?
correct.
But how would they know
So,
what dying is?
Well, they obviously were explained, if they were told, if God told them that if you eat from the tree, you will die, they obviously must have been taught what death means. And they could have understood it, even if they never saw it by anyone else, that they will no longer be able to feel all their senses and do everything that they can do. They just will no longer have any conscious experience. They won't be there anymore. I guess they could have, they should have been able to understand that concept even without seeing it by anybody else. And clearly they must have known language. And I don't remember, but I think there is something about Hashem teaching him the language or something like that. So I think it's reasonable to say that they could have understood the language and what that meant. And by the way, about the analogy about kids not knowing about immodesty, that's actually what one of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's in his commentary on this story gives that analogy as well. That kids don't have this knowledge, very young children don't yet have this type of knowledge. Okay, so let's move on later in the chapter to verse 22. Yeah.
Do we know who died first?
What was that?
Adam or Hava? Do we know who died first, Adam or Hava? Does it say?
Well, so what happened was that it's not that they died right away, but they became susceptible to death.
No, I know.
Until then, right. So that's who died first.
Adam lived for 100 years.
What's that?
I know that Adam lived for 930 years, so Chava would have had to beat him. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know how long Chava.
Okay, that was a literal question. I didn't know what the answer was. Who died first, husband or wife? And I was actually asking if you knew the answer.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer. I do not know the answer of who died first. I would imagine that Eve, Chava, the woman, died first. That's my guess, because I know that Adam, it says about him that he lived 930 years. So I'm just going to go with that as a guess, that he lived longer, but I don't know for sure. So let's move on to verse 22. And here we see that God validates one of the things very clearly that the snake said. The snake said, God is afraid that you will become like him, knowing good and evil. And God repeats almost that exact sentence in verse 22. So maybe, Charlie, if you'd like to read this one in verse 22.
It says, now the Lord Hashem said, behold, man has become like one of us, having the ability of knowing good and evil. And now, lest he stretch forth his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever.
So this story is very cryptic, and it's explained in many, many sources, the Medrash and the Kabbalah and Hasidic texts. I mean, this story is extremely cryptic, but basically it appears that if they would have eaten, remember the tree that was forbidden was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But then there's the tree of life. And if they would eat from the tree of life, they would be able to live forever. So this is the point in the story when God decided that they should be banished from the Garden of Eden. Why did God want them to be banished from the Garden of Eden? God was afraid as follows. They just ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So good and evil is now incorporated within them and has become a part of them. What happens if they now eat from the tree of life and they can now live forever? Then evil will live forever. And God didn't want that. And therefore God said, let's banish them from the Garden of Eden so they will not be able to live forever with the evil. Let's banish them so that they will be outside of the Garden of Eden and they will live a limited life and eventually die, so evil won't live forever. That's what's going on over here. Let's read a Rashi or two. Maybe let's go back to Shmuel, if you want to read here the first Rashi. Man has become like one of us, says God.
As us having the ability, he is just as I am unique among the heavenly beings. And what is his uniqueness? To know God and good and evil, unlike the cattle and the beasts.
Okay. What would be the problem this is how the Medrash explains it. What would be the problem if he would live forever? I'll read this one. And if he were to live forever, he would be likely to mislead people to follow him and to say that he too is a deity. There are also Agadic midrashim, but they cannot be reconciled with the simple meaning. So what I was saying before was from a Hasidic text, but there's different ways of understanding this. So why should he not live forever? Either from according to the what Rashi said, if he were to live forever, he could convince people that he's a god, or like the Hasidic text explained, based on Kabbalah, if he were to live forever, then the evil would live on forever within him as well. Maybe those two are related ideas. So this is the opening, one of the opening stories of the Torah, and it's a very important story because it's where good and evil was brought into the human condition, and where man first became acquainted with evil. And the whole Torah actually emerges from this story. Why does the whole Torah emerge from this story? Well, they're banished from the Garden of Eden, and then they go to the regular part of the world. The whole Torah emerges from the story because that is actually now the entire service of man. Post Garden of Eden, our entire service is to fix and rectify this mistake that Adam and Eve made of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and bringing evil within themselves. So when will the world again become like it was in a good way before they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? In the days of Mashiach, in the Messianic era. So there's a beginning point where the world was in a good state with no evil in the human beings, and there's an end point where the world will again be in a good state with no evil in human beings, and that's the Messianic era. So between the original sin in the Garden of Eden and the Messianic era, that's when there's good and evil in the world, and the function of Torah is to eradicate the evil from the world. But there's an interesting caveat, because it's not just, it's not as much attacking evil or getting rid of evil. There's a different word here. It's separating. The core function here is separating. You separate between good and evil, and that's good enough. Why is that good enough? Because evil by itself has no existence of its own. It has no energy, it has no life. Once evil is separated, the whole problem is that good and evil are mixed together. Everything in the world, there's some good and some evil. A lot of good and a little evil, a lot of evil and a little good. There's many different levels of mixtures in everything we encounter, and it's our job to separate between the good and the evil. But once something's separated and the evil is by itself, it has no energy to continue existing. So let's read another verse or two from the Torah about this subject. So we're going to go on back to our little PowerPoint here. So good and evil, and then Torah's function to separate between good and evil. Let's read here one verse in Vayikra and Leviticus, and then another in Devarim, the 5th book, Deuteronomy. So let's click on this one. And let's go to, so we're doing here, which verse is it? It's verses 46 and 47. Okay, can everyone see this verse 46? Okay, so this is in Parshas Shemini in the book of Leviticus, and it's about kosher food and non-kosher food. So maybe Steve, if you'd like to read 46 and 47.
This is the law regarding animals, birds, and all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that creep on the ground, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. So the word in Hebrew there in 46 where it says this is the law is zos Torah. This is the Torah.
of the kosher and non-kosher animals. And one of the things you see here, and you see it in a number of places in the Torah, is that there's this emphasis on separation, separating between the good and the evil, the pure and the impure, etc. There's the idea of separating. Torah, the wisdom of Torah that we study, is here to help us separate, to understand what is good and what is evil, and separate between the two. But let's read more clearly in the text from Devarim, Deuteronomy. So 1 second, let's click here. Okay. So this is in, does everyone see verse 15 and 16? Yeah, okay. This is from Moshe's speech, final speech to the Jewish people in the 40 days before he dies. And he says like this in verse 15. Maybe Vivian, if you'd like to read verse 15 and 16.
Had to unmute, sorry. Behold, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. Inasmuch as I command you this day to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to observe his commandments, his statutes, and his ordinances, so that you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land to which you are coming to take possession of it. Wow.
Okay.
Cool.
So one of the important things, thank you very much, Vivian, one of the important things we see here in this verse is, especially if you look in the Hebrew, is that we're equating, like Moshe says, I've set before you today life and good. Like I've told you what is good. And I've also set before you death and evil. So I've told you what those two things are. So I now want you to make the choice to follow the path of life and good, and to not follow the path of death and evil. Just another verse. I mean, there's many such verses in the Torah. I just wanted to bring out the idea that the function of Torah is to separate between good and evil. So that,
Rabbi,
yes.
Why interject? You know, of course, I don't want to say too much here on the basis of the fact that I've listened to about 35 years of Chabad talks. But let me just say this, is that Hashem changes his mind, okay? First, he tells you you need to eat from the tree and the ground and the stuff that grows out of the ground. And that's what really good Jews can do. And then because of Noah, after Noah, you know, you could eat meat and blah, blah. You know, all of a sudden now he has to tell you what's between good meat and bad meat. And it's a whole nother ballgame. It's an interesting, to me, that how Hashem changes his mind and goes with the flow, because people demand to eat meat. I eat fish, you know, but I don't eat four-legged creatures. But I just tell you that, you know, this is an interesting, it's a paradox to me, how Hashem flip-flops. And now he's
Okay.
You know, now he's good, it's evil. And
Okay.
He already told you what the Jews should have to do. He changed his mind. Then we have this whole dialogue about what we should eat.
Okay. I don't want to get too far off subject. I just want to make one comment.
I know.
The Jewish philosophers, notably the author of the book Ikarim, which means principles, says, and basically God's will never changes. There's no such thing as God's will changing. If you observe that you were told the one thing earlier and one thing later, it's just like if a doctor tells you to eat one thing today and then later changes his prescription for you because your condition changed. In other words, God's will is always the same for a person in a specific situation. If the person is now in a certain state, then he shouldn't eat meat, like you said. If he's later in a new state, then the person could eat meat. And that's explained. The reasons why something like that the Torah talks about is explained in many different places. I don't want to get too far off topic, but that's definitely something we can discuss. But
it's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, sure. I'm just quoting.
I thought that was great.
I've
thought
read.
maybe
Okay, so let's
parents
go
and
on.
children, I thought more of like parents would, still for the benefit of their child, tell a child one thing, like they would tell their son a certain thing and the daughter a different thing, but it's still for the benefit of the child. But I love the analogy of a doctor saying, "I'll change your prescription." That's perfect.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. That was, I guess that was a good analogy. So we have this framework of good and evil, and what is good and what is evil? Let's hone in on that just for a second. And I already put up here on the screen, and I think you can see it, approaches of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel to good and evil. One second, let me just click on this. Yeah, so you should be able to see that. Actually, this is what I want you to see. Okay, do you see it now? Approaches of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel to good and evil? You do not see that? You do see it?
I see it.
Okay. Vivian doesn't see it. Okay. How do we click this again? Okay. Steve, do you see the approaches of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel to good and evil?
That's the only thing I see.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's it. That's what I want. Okay, good. Excellent.
Oh.
So before we go on to the differing approaches of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, I just want to hone in on what is good and evil. What do we mean by that? So, of course, some parts of it should, people will say are intuitive, or there's different moral and ethical guidelines that different, people have come up with. But from our vantage point in this discussion, good is the 613 mitzvot of the Torah for the Jewish people, or the 7 Noahide laws for all of mankind. That is the definition of good in this context. And evil is going against what the Torah says for the Jewish people, or going against the 7 Noahide laws for all of mankind. And I would take it a step further and venture to say that the 7 Noahide laws are the basic building blocks of good and evil for all of society, for all of mankind. The basic building blocks of good and evil for all of mankind are the 7 Noahide laws, and then the Jewish people have their own rung of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. And we know what good and evil is because God told us what good and evil is, but once we were told what it is, we can also try to understand why those things are good and why those things are evil. And some of them are very intuitive. So if you take some of the basics, some of the 7 Noahide laws, one of them is don't steal, and one of them is don't kill. Those two things are intuitively good and evil. Why? God created life. God gives every human being that ever existed only exists because God decided that human being should exist. Every cell, every organ, every blood vessel, every part of the person is created by Hashem and is recreated constantly at every moment. So for another person to decide that they are going to interrupt that process that Hashem put into place is evil. God decided that there should be life. Preserving life is good. Disrupting life is evil. Same thing as with stealing. Stealing is God created many resources and objects and entities in this world, and it was so that each human being could use those for a positive purpose, could collect some of those items and make them their own, individual ownership of items. And for someone to take an item that now belongs to somebody else is evil. Maybe I want to add just one more piece to the stealing part. Why is it evil to steal? It's also evil for another reason. It's evil because the person stealing is basically denying God's existence. Why are they denying God's existence? They're basically saying, I need to exist, and unless I steal from this other person, I'm afraid that I can't preserve my existence. What they should be saying is, God exists. I don't need to take from anybody else in order to survive and in order to have what I want. God can provide for me without needing to interrupt anyone else's life or anyone else's possession. God has the ability, because I believe that God exists and that God created me and created everything in the world. So I don't need to take from anybody else in order for myself to exist. But if they steal, it's an implicit denial of God's existence. So it's inherently an evil act to steal from someone else, and it's a good act not to steal. And there's actually a flip side that I mentioned sometimes. Charity is the opposite of theft. You can argue it's not the exact opposite, but in the continuum, it's somewhat of an opposite act of theft. To take from what's yours and give it to somebody else is an act of declaring belief in God, saying that even I don't have to hold on to this item to make sure I hold on to everything in order to keep myself in existence. I can relinquish it and give it to somebody else who could use it and who needs it, and that's a divine act. That's a good act. And the Rebbe specifically mentioned charity in the context of refining the world when he wanted to give an example of how we see the world transforming today to a good world. He gave an example in 1991 of the United States sending aid to a distant country, even though it was not an ally and it needed the aid, and the United States sent it. It was because the leaders of the country recognized that there's one entity in charge of all of existence, and that they felt a responsibility to use their resources to help a distant country that was in need of aid. The Rebbe gave it as an example of charity, of refining the world and doing a good act. So let's go on to the two approaches, though. So good and evil, though, you could say is like black and white. Just do good and don't do evil. It's very simple. So happens to be it's not always so simple. And if you look at the news today, we are bombarded with hundreds and thousands of minor decisions and stories and questions, which are a mix of good and evil. There's like something good about it. There's something bad about it. How do we navigate it? How do we approach it? Like everything that we encounter has, there's maybe a good and a bad side to the same thing. And then there's this question of how do we navigate this question? So let's just start with Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. They're differing approaches to this question of good and evil. So let's just, 1 second here. Like this. Okay, so I just want to make sure everyone saw the screen. Move on to the next screen. So we have, of course, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, there were two Talmudic academies 2,000 years ago in the land of Israel, two groups of sages who were, originally it was one sage Hillel and one sage Shammai, and then their students became these large groups who were known as Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai, or Beit Hillel, the house of Hillel. It was two different competing methodologies of how to approach Torah. And they both agreed that you have to listen to the Torah, but they had a different way of approaching a doubt. So the simple way of understanding them is that Beit Shammai is strict. Whenever there's a doubt about what to do, Beit Shammai took the more strict approach. And whenever there was a doubt, Beit Hillel took the more lenient approach. I just wanted to click on this little Wikipedia article. I know it's forbidden ever to mention Wikipedia. It's not a good source. But if you know that what you're reading is authoritative, sometimes it's written well, so it's a good, just something nice to read through. So we'll click on this Wikipedia link, and let's go to this thing right here.
Are we going to donate to this cause?
You absolutely, sure, definitely. If you find it useful, sure. So maybe Vivian, if you'd like to read this little section here for us,
okay.
if you may.
The house of Hillel, Beit Hillel, and house of Shammai, Beit Shammai, were, among Jewish scholars, two schools of Talmudim, named after the sages Hillel and Shammai. of the last century BCE and the early 1st century CE, who found, let's see, I'm going to have to move my pictures out of the way, who founded their vigorous debates on matters of ritual practice, ethics, and theology, which were critical for the shaping of the oral law and I think it says Judea. I can't read the.
You can't see that, okay.
So what's it say? Oral law and?
Judaism.
Judaism, as it is today.
Okay. The Mishnah mentions the disagreement of Hillel and Shammai as one which had lasting positive value. A disagreement which is for the sake of heaven will be preserved, and one which is not for the sake of heaven will not be preserved. Disagreement, that is for the sake of heaven. The disagreement of Hillel and Shammai, that is not for the sake of heaven and his congregation.
The disagreement of Korach and his congregation.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Right. In most cases, though not always, Beit Hillel's opinion is the more lenient, just what you said, and the tolerant of the two. In nearly all cases, Beit Hillel's
opinion has been accepted as normative.
You can finish it by halacha, and is the opinion followed by modern Jews. Okay, yeah.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you, Vivian.
Sorry.
Let's go back to this. There it is. Okay, so let's take an example here of a specific argument. So we'll do tractate Berachot. So tractate Berachot, chapter 8, Mishnah 7. Everybody see this? 1 second. One who has eaten and forgotten? Okay, so maybe Charlie, if you could read for us this Mishnah.
One who has eaten and forgotten to bless, Beit Shammai says he must return to the place where he ate and bless. But Ben Hillel says he should stay it in the place where he remembered. Until when can he bless? Until sufficient time has passed for the food in his stomach to be digested.
Thank you, Charlie. So this Mishnah is a classic example of an argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai is more strict. He says that if there's a law, everyone agrees to this law. The law is that when you eat bread, you're supposed to bless in the same place where you ate. What if you forgot? That's the argument. Beit Shammai is more strict. He says you have to go back to the place where you ate and bless. He forces you to return. Beit Hillel says you don't have to go back. Bless wherever you remember. He's more lenient. This is one example. I should bring you one example of an argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. They have hundreds of arguments recording in the Talmud. I think it's at least over 300 arguments recorded of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel in the Talmud. And the overwhelming majority, Beit Shammai is strict and Beit Hillel is lenient. And to the extent that there's a place in the Talmud where it lists the 3 or maybe 5 exceptions where Beit Hillel was more the other way around. There were like a few exceptions. Let's just do one more example. So 1 second here. One more example. So this is Tractate Shabbat, chapter 1, Mishnah 6. And maybe, who just read? Maybe Dave, are you there? Dave Margolis, are you with us? Okay, maybe Shmuel, if you can read for us this Mishnah.
Beit Shammai says one may only place bundles of combed flax inside the oven on Shabbat Eve if there is sufficient time so that they will be heated while it is still day. And one may only place wool in the dye's kettle if there is sufficient time for the wool to absorb the dye while it is still day. And Beit Hillel permit doing so. Beit Shammai says, So continue?
Yeah, go ahead. Second argument. Two arguments.
Okay, one may spread traps for an animal and birds and fish only if there's sufficient time remaining in the day for them to be trapped in, and then while it's still day. And Beit Hillel permit doing so even if there's not sufficient time remaining in the day.
Okay, so basically it's another class. One second, I see there's something flashing here in the chat. Let me see here. Oh, Dave. Okay, Dave is there. No microphone. Okay, good. No problem, Dave. We're with you, Dave. Okay. So there's two arguments here in this Mishnah. In both of them, Beit Shammai is more strict and Beit Hillel is more lenient. I'll give you an analogy and then I'll explain it. The analogy is, a modern analogy is, are you allowed to bring a piece of mail to the post office 1 minute before Shabbat starts, knowing that it's going to be delivered on Shabbat? So generally speaking, the answer is 100% yes. Why? Because they can deliver it whenever they want. But what if it's express mail and you say that you want it to be delivered by tomorrow morning? So you bring it Friday evening, 1 minute before Shabbat starts, and you pay for whatever it is, express mail, overnight mail, has to be delivered by tomorrow morning. That's forbidden because you're not giving them enough time. Then it's no longer their choice. You're forcing them to deliver it on Shabbat. And they could do it as fast as they want. In other words, if it's 2 hours before, that might be fine because they could, if they theoretically wanted, they could drive in a car and quickly bring it to that. They won't do it because it's economically not worth it for them. But as long as in theory they could have delivered it with enough time, if they would have done it in the most fast way, that's good enough. So Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel is saying something similar. You're only allowed to place bundles of combed flax inside the oven. This is a little different, but it's similar. If there's sufficient time that it could be heated while it's still day. Similarly, you can only place the wool into the dyer's kettle. Nowadays, we have clothing. Clothing has color. How do you put color on clothing? So you take the wool and you put it into a pot with ink, and the pot boils the colored ink into the wool. So that's what they used to do. You're only allowed to do that if there's enough time before Shabbat for the color to be absorbed in the wool. Why? Because if you put it right before Shabbat, we're afraid that you'll mix the pot on Shabbat, which will be a violation of the prohibition of cooking. So Beit Shammai, and really this is not a problem because you might not stir the pot. So we're not going to for sure stir the pot. So Beit Hillel permits it, and Beit Shammai is forbidden. That's, in short, the gist of it. All three examples here, actually, in this Mishnah are the same general idea of doing something 1 minute before Shabbat, or doing something with enough time for the act that you intended to be able to happen before Shabbat. There's details here, but we won't get into all the details. But in short, Beit Shammai takes a strict approach. Beit Hillel takes a lenient approach. Worry about something, don't worry about something. Okay. Those are two examples of Beit Shammai being strict or lenient. But on a deeper level, what does it mean that they're being strict? And what does it mean that they're being lenient? What's their overarching philosophical mindset? What are they really thinking? Why is one of them tend to be strict? Why is one of them tend to be lenient? What more is behind this? So let's go here for a second to this. So the Rebbe gives a very interesting explanation, and this can be unpacked more and more. There's many different ways, many different paragraphs in the original talk. Can learn it again and try to understand it better, but I want to read through some of this, a deeper understanding of their argument. So maybe Vivian, if you could read, or Steve, if you could read the first half of this. What do Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree on when it comes to the framework of good and evil?
Both agree things that are certainly undesirable should be pushed away. Also, things that are certainly permissible should be brought close by using it for a divine purpose.
Okay. So Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are aware that the Torah is a framework for rectifying the first sin of integrating good and evil into the human condition, and that we're trying to separate between good and evil so that we can arrive at the Messianic era foretold by the Jewish prophet. And so they both agree that if the Torah says something is undesirable, then everything in the world has to be brought to its divine purpose. So if the Torah says about something that is undesirable, let's say it says pig is not kosher. So Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree that the method of the pig fulfilling its divine purpose is not that you should bring it close, but that you should push it away. You should not eat it. That's the method of bringing it to its divine purpose. What about something that is certainly permissible? A cow is a kosher animal. If it's slaughtered, it's for sure permitted to be eaten. Both of them agree that you should bring it close. You should use it for a divine purpose. Well, it could either be the milk, drinking the milk of the cow, or it could be slaughtering it and eating the meat, using that for a good purpose, for energy, to serve Hashem, to do another mitzvah. So in whichever way, but things that are certainly permissible should be, the method of utilizing them is by bringing them, the method of having them reach their divine purpose is through bringing them close and using them for a divine purpose. Where do they argue? So maybe Vivian, if you could read the second half over here,
Yep.
Where do they argue?
They argue that things that are openly good but have hidden or potential evil. So Beit Shammai is strict because of the hidden or potential evil, but Beit Hillel is lenient, used for a divine purpose because there is no visible evil.
So,
Wow.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
in the case of Shammai, if you were eating a sandwich on the top of the Empire State Building, and somebody said, "Okay, it's time to leave," and so you went down the elevators, you hit the street, you go, "Oh my goodness, I forgot to say the blessing. So I have to go back up, and it takes another half hour, an hour, who knows?" And you've done that for Shammai, but Hillel would have said, "No, go ahead and do the Birkat HaMazon right there on the street, and you're done." And in one case, the individual felt gratified because he went up on top of the Empire State Building and made everybody else's party wait about an hour. And Hillel would have said, "No, go ahead and do that. You're not doing anything. It's not an Avera. You're fine. You did the blessing." So, and frankly, I probably would have sided on Hillel on that one. So,
Okay.
So the idea is that, and others would have said, "No, you messed up." I'm not sure whether or not you have to make a decision on whether or not you're good or evil on certain things. You know, certain things are very important, certain things are not. And, you know, and people differ on that. So, as well as Shammai and Hillel. And that's the way life is.
Okay. I just want to mention something, Shmuel, and we're going to talk about this in a second. So what do we do? Because there's Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. The rabbis are arguing. So what do we do now? So the Torah has an approach of what to do when the rabbis argue. And the approach is called follow the majority. Acharei Rabbim Lahatas. Whatever the majority of the Torah scholars currently believe is the authoritative Torah interpretation is what all of the Jews need to follow at that time. Now they can overturn it because they can, if a court of law that is equal in wisdom and in numbers arises and says later that they decide differently, then they can change it. But at the current moment, whatever the most recent majority of that Beit Din in wisdom and in numbers. The most recent majority has decided that's what everyone has to follow. So happens to be, let's see if we have it here. Okay. So happens to be that, and I guess I kind of want to explain this first. So let's talk about this for a second. Maybe Charlie, if you could read this page over here.
To follow? It says
Yeah,
nowadays,
to follow.
Yeah, nowadays halacha follows Beit Hillel at https://www. And in the future era, halacha will follow Beit Shammai. So
let's explain.
How long, as you're explaining, right? How long has Beit Hillel been, how long is nowadays for Beit Hillel is a question.
2,000 years. So the halacha was decided according to Beit Hillel 2,000 years ago. And it has followed Beit Hillel until today. And one classic one is the light Hanukkah candles. Beit Hillel says you do first one candle, then 2, then 3, then 4. And Beit Shammai says you do the opposite. You start with 8, and then go down 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the Rabbi explains the reason is that Beit Hillel goes by the open good. So he says, like, on the first night you know about that the candle lasted one night. The second night you know it lasted 2 nights. Beit Shammai goes by potential. He already knows in advance that there's 8 nights left to the miracle, or 7 nights left, or 6 nights left. Don't worry about the strict or lenient too much for this one. But anyways, Beit Hillel, we go follow Beit Hillel's approach. For the last 2,000 years, we follow Beit Hillel's approach. Who even says that when Mashiach comes in the future era, we'll follow Beit Shammai? This wasn't a known concept. It doesn't say this in the Talmud. But I'm presenting this here because it's an insight from a Kabbalistic source. It's an insight from the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who lived in Sefed, in Sfat, 500 years ago, one of the foremost Kabbalists in Jewish history. And he said this insight, based not as a prediction, but based on his understanding of Torah and his understanding of the Messianic era. Based on those two understandings, that he believed, it's a Torah insight, that he believed that halacha will revert to the approach of Beit Shammai in the future Messianic era. What's the link here, by the way? Wikipedia. Let's go to that Wikipedia just for a second about the Arizal.
We're going to end up donating.
What?
I said we're going to end up donating if we keep going up back to Wikipedia.
We're going to end up going? What was that? Oh,
we're going to end up donating if we keep going back
donating.
to.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. That's great. Donating is a good idea. Wikipedia. Okay, let's scroll down here a little bit in Wikipedia. Support our nonprofit today with $2.75 and keep Wikipedia. There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If maybe Shmuel, if you could read for us this line over here that I highlighted from Wikipedia.
According to Rabbi Isaac Luria, in the future Messianic era, halacha will follow Beit Shammai rather than Beit Hillel.
Now, don't worry, we're not relying on Wikipedia for this information. It just happens to be written here. They give us a source also, 22. It's a Hebrew source. I looked there before, don't worry. The Rabbi talks about this, well sourced, no problem. So in the future Messianic era, halacha will follow Beit Shammai. So this is really interesting, the way the Rabbi explains it. How come nowadays we follow the approach of Beit Hillel, and in the future Messianic era will follow the opinion of Beit Shammai? It's going to get, and as much as we'll explain today, there's probably more to unpack on this subject. And there's so much application to this. Like, I believe, this is my opinion, that this difference can apply to almost any subject being debated today. The difference, if it's a question of, is there potential or hidden evil? Like, if it's a doubt, there's visible good, but there's potential or hidden evil. So what do? Do you push it away because of the potential or hidden evil? Or do you bring it close because of the visible good? Like a classic example, and I'm going to give examples, but if I get the examples wrong, don't worry. I'm just trying to give an example to try to, an example would be cancel culture. What's cancel culture? Someone is canceled, so to speak, because of something negative that they, maybe someone here could give a good example. Let's have any example somebody here wants to bring of something that's pushed away because of hidden or potential. Maybe let's explain this more first. I want to explain one more thing about Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Let's explain this first. I'm going to explain their names. This is what the Rebbe explains in the talk. Let's go back to this PowerPoint. And let's see here. Share the PowerPoint. There it is. Okay. Okay, so let's do this. Okay. Okay, so we're on this page. Let's make a new page here. New slide. Duplicate selected slide. Okay. Erase some of this stuff here. Let's write Beit Shammai. What is the word Shammai? This is what the Rebbe explains in the talk. What is the word Shammai in Hebrew? What is that like? So Shammai is related to a Hebrew word called sham, which means to evaluate or assess. And what he says is, let's make a quotation mark, evaluate your pathways. That's the approach of Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai analyzes and evaluates his pathways to detect, is there any potential or hidden evil? Visibly, everything I'm doing is perfect. But he reanalyzes what he does. Maybe there's some potential or hidden evil in what I'm doing. So I want to give an example a contemporary example, which I came across recently, which I think is a textbook classic example of Beit Shammai. And we're going to Google it right now because I don't have a link to it yet. So we're going to Google it. And I think we'll find it fairly quickly. Let's see here. One second. So let's do Massachusetts law study. Racism. Let's add the word racism. Okay. Let's do this one. I want to find the original text here. Maybe it's this one. There it is. Harvard.edu. Perfect. This is a textbook example of Beit Shammai. I believe Beit Shammai's approach is evil that is not visible on its own, but only emerges through data. That's Beit Shammai's approach. So what's good? I'll tell you what's good. The 7 Noahide laws are good. What's the 7th and last of the Noahide laws? Establishing courts of law. And we spoke about this in our last class of this series about establishing courts of law. there's two sides to courts of law. There's law itself, and then there's law enforcement. So both of those are good in the context of Torah. Torah believes that there should be law, and Torah believes that there should be law enforcement. Both of those are good because they protect every human being. Now, when is law good? When it's equally applied. When is law enforcement good? When it's equally applied. So, since I think it's, you tell me the exact year. I was just looking it up before the class. Since 1954, it has been ruled unconstitutional. Any law, in the side of law, not law enforcement, any law in the United States that discriminates against any human being has been ruled unconstitutional since 1954. Jim Crow laws. Any law that is not equal to every person in the country is, so what would be good? Good is that law applies equally to all. That's good. Not good is a law that in the law itself, it's written in the law itself that some laws apply to this group of people and some laws apply to that group of people. That is not good in the law itself. We haven't had that, as far as I understand, in the United States for however many years it is, 50 years, etc. We haven't had an explicit law that's visibly discriminatory in the language of the law itself in that many years. So what did this Harvard Law study do? It was searching to see if there's hidden evil. There's no visible evil in the law. And actually, this is maybe on the side of law enforcement. Is there any hidden evil? How do you observe this hidden evil? So law enforcement is also good. Anytime that someone commits a crime, they're brought to court. The witnesses testify what they saw. The judges and the jury, listens to all the testimony and they make a decision. The person goes to jail or they go free. There's a process of law enforcement. That's also good. It's equally applied. So what did this study do? And I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with the study. I have to understand. I read through some of this, and I'm just presenting this as a textbook example of Beit Shammai's approach, as far as I understand. Beit Shammai's approach. It's evil that emerges through data, not visible on its own, but emerges through data. What did they observe? I don't even know if they observed this, but maybe what may have they observed? That they looked at every case over a certain time period. We have a customer that, a friend that just joined us. Life cereal, okay, all right. So,
what's life without life cereal?
There we go. Without ripping the whole thing apart, right? If anyone can help me here.
Step up from Cheerios.
Okay, so back to the study. So the Beit Shammai this study, I believe, is to evaluate our system, which is already visibly good. The law is officially equally applied. The enforcement is officially equally applied. So visibly, the entire seventh law of the Noahide laws, which is law and law enforcement, on a visible level is good. But if we observe the data, can we see a hidden or potential evil? So what did it do? They basically said, looking at all these cases of, let's say, African Americans or whites, was there a disparity in the sentence? So let's say they went through every part of the judicial system. So did they receive disproportionately, 20 days more of a jail sentence than this other group? I'm just giving you an example of this study. That was their attempt in this study. So let's just say, for example, that they would have proved conclusively that one group received, on average, 100 days more of a jail sentence than another group. So again, visibly, every single thing that happened was good. Why was it good? A criminal of any group was testified against and received a sentence. It's good. That's the seventh law of the Noahide laws, law and law enforcement. Visibly, everyone, good happened. But the potential evil is, how come there's a disparity in the level of good for this one and the level of good for that one? So that might indicate that perhaps there's a subconscious bias hiding that may affect the decision-making process of the people deciding on the sentences. In other words, there may be some kind of implicit or hidden negative feeling towards one group, and therefore that's affecting the sentence that they receive. So, and then we need to, once we discover this, the next step is to take steps to try to eliminate it, right? Because otherwise, what's the point of making this study? So this, I believe, is a textbook example of Beit Shammai. So let's go back to Beit Hillel now. Then, any thoughts before we go back to Beit Hillel? Any thoughts here? Does this analogy make sense? Is this a fair analogy? Can we say this? Just want to.
We can say it.
All right. So Beit Hillel. Hillel comes from the word bahilu, which means to shine. So Beit Hillel is that as many things as possible should shine. So if you have a question of maybe pushing something away because it has potential or hidden evil, or keeping it because visibly there's no evil, Beit Hillel says keep it because in the overarching picture of making this world a better place, says Beit Hillel, we need to make sure that as many things as possible become elevated to holiness, says Beit Hillel. We can't just push something away. And I think the best examples of this kind of thing, from my perspective, is some of the pandemic-related questions. Because you have, on the one hand, you have, some things are more obvious, right? Some things are like, okay, this is for sure problematic. Some things are obvious on the other side. This is for sure okay. And then you have like a gray area in the middle, and everyone, by the way, has their own gray area. You're not going to get the same gray area from anybody. But everyone has their own gray area where, well, on the one hand, this should be a good thing to do. And on the other hand, maybe there's a risk to this thing. So should I do it because it's good, or should I not do it because maybe the risk of something bad? For example, should I go to hear the shofar, on Rosh Hashanah? That's a good thing. But then there's a risk to life. So in this specific circumstance, how do I weigh the two things? And Beit Hillel would typically take, if it was a gray area, he would take the more lenient approach. So I don't want to get carried away here, but there's a lot more to this, but let's proceed as follows. So if you just look at the Rebbe's talk itself, what does the conclusion seem to be just from reading the Rebbe's talk? It would seem that the Rebbe is suggesting that nowadays, and I'm going to offer an alternative view in a moment based on what I think the Rebbe might also be saying, but just from the strict reading of the text of the Rebbe's talk itself, it would seem that nowadays we must follow the approach of Beit Hillel, meaning to say we need to first tackle any visible evil that exists in the world before we can tackle any hidden or potential evil. Because once we finish tackling all of visible evil in the world, we arrive at the Messianic era. From the Messianic era and on, we can then begin Beit Shammai, which is attacking the hidden and potential evil as well. So a simple reading of the Rebbe's text, this is a simple reading, and I would argue there's a lot more to it in a moment, but a simple reading of the Rebbe's text would suggest that when you come across a problem in the world today, multiple problems, and you're trying to figure out which one should I tackle first, or what should I do in this situation, that until all visible evil is eradicated from the world, which when we arrive at the Messianic era, we need to first deal with only visible evil. And potential evil we should not pay attention to. That's what a simple reading of what the Rebbe is saying would suggest. That's what it seems from a simple reading. And the Rebbe says that nowadays, he basically says it's forbidden to follow the path of Beit Shammai in the nowadays time period. There's so many examples. I don't want to get too off topic, and everyone could probably give their own examples. And it would be really nice to apply this to many different things. But if anyone wants to give an example, feel free. But we can proceed either way. So I was wondering, though, and this is part of why it took a while to actually prepare this class. I had a big question on this talk that I was uncertain about. What I was trying to figure out was as follows. Is there any way that in a certain sense we're holding in the Messianic era with regards to following Beit Shammai's approach? In other words, let's backtrack. From a simple reading of the Rebbe's talk, we're holding right now in the time period of nowadays. We have not yet reached the Messianic era. Nowadays we follow Beit Hillel. In the Messianic era we'll follow Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel nowadays means that we only deal with visible evil. We push off dealing with hidden evil. So according to that approach, this Massachusetts study commissioned by between the Massachusetts Department of Justice and Harvard we wouldn't look into this yet because we're not yet up to tackling this more visible evil in the world that we still have to tackle. We're not up to reanalyzing our pathways and looking for the potential evil. We didn't get up to there yet. That's what a simple reading of what the Rebbe's talk was. There's so much more to this. So my question was, I had a few reasons to think this. Is there any possibility that the Rebbe intended that in certain sense we are holding in the Messianic era, in this regard at least, and that we should also follow at times the approach of Beit Shammai and seek to eradicate hidden or potential evil from our midst as well? And I think there's really so many examples of this. This could literally apply to almost any discussion, I believe, that's happening, almost any discussion that's happening in the world today, because so many discussions involve hidden or potential evil that emerges from data or evil that's not visible, as opposed to visible evil.
Rabbi.
So I had a few reasons to think that maybe the Rebbe does think that we're holding in the Messianic era in a few senses, and that we should follow also the approach of Beit Shammai. One reason was, what are the tools that are used? Which tools does Beit Hillel use, and which tools does Beit Shammai use? So the Rebbe said Beit Hillel uses the approach of the revealed Torah. That means the Mishnah, Talmud, Code of Jewish law, etc. So in other words, how do you tackle visible evil? Through visible Torah. Visible evil or visible good in the world, how do you tackle it? Through the visible Torah, through the laws of the Torah that are visible. And what's Beit Shammai's tool? This isn't perfect on the outline thing, but we'll do it like this anyways. Beit Shammai his tool is the soul of Torah, Kabbalah, Hasidus, etc. And how do you tackle potential for hidden evil? Let's erase this little red thing here. There we go. How do you tackle hidden or potential evil through the hidden part of Torah? So, and the Rebbe is basing this off of different statements that the Talmud tells us about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So the Talmud tells us that Beit Hillel were the majority, but they were bashful and gentle. What about Beit Shammai? They were the minority, but they were sharper and smarter. That's what the Talmud tells us about Beit Shammai. Let's actually look at that inside just for a second. Let's find that inside. Let's go to, where are we? Let's see. Let's go to, okay. Maybe, Steve, if you could read this little line here.
Here, however, Beit Shammai are sharper than Beit Hillel, and therefore acted in accordance with their own opinion.
Okay, thank you, Steve. This is from the Talmud Tractate Yevamot, page 14a. It's part of a very long discussion about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and the Talmud says that they are machaditi tvei. Beit Shammai were sharper, so they were the minority, but they were like the extra smart people that like looked deeply into all the data or looked deeply into the potential or possible issues. Like the majority of the rabbis were saying, "Oh, this is okay, no worries, permit this. This is okay. There's no visible evil here." And then these minority of rabbis, the Beit Shammai, the sharper ones, they were like, "What about this problem? What about that problem? Maybe if you do this, this will happen." And they were the ones that were worrying about all the potential evil that might happen if you allow this act to take place. And again, the majority won. Beit Hillel won because they wanted to utilize all those things for the divine service of Hashem. They were visibly good. And Beit Shammai at the time was only the minority. So, and going back to our little screen that we had before, the Rebbe equates this with the revealed and with the hidden Torah. That Beit Hillel learned Torah on its revealed level, and Beit Shammai, when it says that they were smarter, means they dug deeper. They dug deeper beyond just the body of the Torah to the soul of the Torah behind the body. What are the different spiritual ideas behind the visible elements within the Torah itself? So why do I mention this? I'm trying to explain why I was wondering if in the Rebbe's talk, maybe we're also nowadays supposed to do some of the Beit Shammai approaches and worry also about some of the potential evil today. So it's because, why was I wondering this? Because the Rebbe says the tool of Beit Shammai is the soul of Torah, Kabbalah and Hasidus. When is that supposed to be revealed? In the Messianic era, when Mashiach comes. But we have a taste of it before the Messianic era. Nowadays, it says we have a taste of it. We have a taste of the soul of Torah. So I was wondering if we already have a taste of Beit Shammai's tool, which is the hidden Torah. So maybe nowadays we can also use that tool to follow the approach of Beit Shammai at times. So I want to kind of wrap it up with this. There's so much to talk about, but I want to wrap up the formal class so that people can ask questions and we can end the formal discussion here. So I spoke about this with a few friends. I actually conferred. I asked a couple of people what they thought about this question. Should we only follow the opinion of Beit Hillel today, or can we also do the approach of Beit Shammai looking for hidden evil? So some of them suggested, some gave some good ideas. There's not necessarily just black and white that we only follow Beit Hillel. If we have the tools to do so, then we can look for hidden evil. Meaning to say, if you're just throwing something out because it might have hidden evil in it, but you can't offer any alternative, in other words, you don't have the tools to deal with this, then you shouldn't be pushing the thing away. You should only be pushing something away if you have the tools with which to deal with that thing. You have the soul of Torah about that thing. You have the tools to deal with it. Let's say you discover that there's give an example of systemic racism. I don't want to get too off subject, but let's say you discover that there's something negative. Do you have a tool to deal with that thing? If you don't have a tool yet to deal with that thing, then it's not yet the time for that thing. If you do have the tool for it, then it is the time. Another suggestion was that it also depends on a specific situation. If you have two things to tackle at the same time, hidden and revealed good, visible, something that's visibly good or something that's only potentially evil, you should first deal with the visible and only afterwards proceed to the hidden. Okay, so that's just some thoughts I wanted to share. I want to hear some input. I think we'll kind of end it off on here. Again, the talk of the Rebbe itself, in the text itself, says that nowadays we follow Beit Hillel. In the Messianic era, we're going to follow Beit Shammai, which means that nowadays we only tackle that which is visibly evil. We do not worry about the potential or hidden evil. Why not? Because it's out of order. It's premature. It will push us off the order of making the world a better place because we're not dealing with things in the proper order. We should be worried about everything, but at the right time. We should be worried about every trace of evil, even in the most minute and small form, but in the right place. So first we need to deal with the visible, and then we deal with the potential evil. That's from the literal reading of the text. But I was wondering also, is there any way that maybe the Rebbe also means that we could follow the Beit Shammai approach and deal even nowadays with the hidden evil? And there is possibly some room for that. But now let's end the formal discussion here.